The fluorescent lights in Riverside Veterans Home hummed their endless song, casting everything in that peculiar shade of yellow that made the world feel trapped between waking and dreaming. Marcus Webb moved through the hallway like smoke, each step measured, deliberate, quiet enough that the night nurse wouldn't hear him over the low drone of the television in the break room. His left hand trailed along the wall, steadying the tremor that never quite left his fingers anymore, while his right gripped the worn handle of his cane. 68 years old, decorated Marine, reduced to sneaking through hallways like a prisoner planning escape. At his side, Duke moved with the precision of the military working dog he'd once been. The Belgian Malinois kept his head low, ears rotating like radar dishes, picking up every sound before Marcus's aging ears could register it. They'd spent 3 years together in this place. 3 years of being told when to wake, when to eat, when to take pills that dulled the edges of everything, until Marcus sometimes couldn't remember why he'd fought so hard to stay alive in the first place. Duke's nose touched Marcus's thigh gently. Marcus froze, pressing himself into the shallow alcove near the laundry room. His heart hammered against his ribs, and for a moment the hallway flickered, becoming a narrow street in Fallujah. The walls closing in, the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of fear. His breath caught, chest tightening. Duke pressed his full weight against Marcus's legs, grounding him. The dog's warmth, his steady breathing, the familiar scent of his fur, all of it pulled Marcus back from the edge. The hallway resolved itself. The institutional green walls, the motivational posters, the medication cart parked outside. Room 217. Footsteps passed. Jenny, the younger aide, carrying fresh linens toward the west wing. She hummed softly to herself, oblivious. When silence returned, Marcus exhaled slowly and continued forward. They'd practiced this route for months, noting every camera blind spot, every shift change, every predictable pattern. Duke had always been good at patterns. During their deployment, the dog could sense an ambush 5 minutes before it happened, reading the landscape in ways that saved Marcus's life more times than he could count. The emergency exit loomed ahead, its red sign glowing like a promise. Marcus had disabled the alarm 2 days ago during recreation hour, carefully loosening the wire connection just enough. No one had noticed. No one ever noticed the old Marine who kept to himself, who spoke in short sentences, who spent his afternoons staring out windows at mountains he couldn't reach. His hand closed around the door handle. Cold, metal, real, solid. "This is it, boy," he whispered. "Last chance to stay comfortable." Duke's tail lifted once, a silent vote cast. Marcus pushed the door open. Cold November air rushed in, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and freedom. The Montana night spread before them, vast and dark and impossibly beautiful. Stars scattered across the sky like shattered glass, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out a lonely question to the darkness. Marcus stepped through the doorway, and the weight that had been pressing on his chest for 3 years lifted just slightly. Not gone, never gone, but lighter, breathable. They moved quickly down the service road that ran behind the facility, Duke trotting ahead now, nose working the ground. The gravel crunched under Marcus's boots, each step taking him farther from the room that had become his cell, from the pills that smoothed everything into gray sameness, from the daughter who'd signed the papers without meeting his eyes. Rebecca, his only child, the little girl who used to ride on his shoulders through these same Montana mountains, who'd helped him build a treehouse at his father's ranch, who'd cried at his deployment and written him letters every week he was overseas. That girl had grown into a woman who looked at him with pity and fear, who'd decided he couldn't be trusted to live alone after the stroke, who'd chosen safety over dignity without asking what he wanted. The stroke, 18 months ago. He'd been chopping wood at his father's old ranch when his left side simply stopped working. like someone had cut the power to half his body. He'd woken up in a hospital, and by the time his speech came back enough to argue, the decisions had already been made. Riverside Veterans Home. Best care available. Clean rooms, activities, medical staff on site 24/7, everything except freedom. Duke slowed as they reached the tree line, waiting for Marcus to catch up. The dog's eyes reflected the moonlight, patient and knowing. They'd walked these woods before, years ago, back when Marcus could still hike 10 miles without his legs screaming. Back when his father was still alive, and the ranch still felt like home. 2 miles to the highway, Marcus said quietly. Then we catch a ride. They entered the forest together. The path was overgrown but familiar, muscle memory guiding Marcus's feet, even in the darkness. Branches caught at his jacket. Roots threatened to trip him. But he kept moving, driven by something deeper than logic, deeper than the rational voice that sounded suspiciously like Rebecca telling him this was dangerous, reckless, that he wasn't well enough for this. Screw well enough. He'd survived 2 tours, multiple firefights, and a stroke. He could survive a walk through the woods. An hour later, they emerged onto the shoulder of Highway 89. Marcus's leg throbbed, his cane hand cramped, and his breath came in ragged gasps. But they'd made it. Duke sat beside him, unbothered by the cold, watching the empty road with the same alertness he'd shown watching enemy positions. Only 3 vehicles passed in the next 20 minutes. The first 2 didn't even slow down. The third, an old pickup truck with a camper shell, pulled over 30 yards past them, brake lights glowing red in the darkness. The driver's window rolled down. A weathered face peered out, somewhere between 50 and 70, the kind of face the mountains carved into people who stayed long enough. "You lost?" the driver called. Marcus limped toward the truck, Duke matching his pace. "Need a ride to Whitefish?" "Nuke." The driver studied him, taking in the VA-issue jacket, the cane, the dog with the faded service vest. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Respect, possibly. "That's 40 miles, the driver said. "I know. Kind of late for a walk. Kind of late for a lot of things." The driver nodded slowly, as if this answer made perfect sense. "Get in. Dog can ride in back if he's friendly." "He's friendly enough," Marcus said. The driver shrugged and unlocked the doors. Duke hopped into the cab first, settling on the bench seat with practiced ease. Marcus pulled himself up after, grateful when his leg cooperated enough not to embarrass him. The truck smelled like coffee and sawdust. A thermos sat in the cup holder, and a toolbox rattled in the bed as they pulled back onto the highway. They drove in silence for several miles before the driver spoke again. "You break out of somewhere?" Marcus almost smiled. "That obvious? Seen that look before. Man, who's done being told what to do?" The driver glanced at Duke. "Service dog? Bomb detection. Afghanistan, 2nd tour. You served together? 3 years deployed. 3 years at Riverside. 3 years. 3 years. At Riverside." The driver's jaw tightened. "Riverside. That's one word for it. What would you call it?" "Expensive waiting room." The driver was quiet for a long moment. "My uncle was in a place like that. Good man, sharp as a tack, but his kids couldn't handle him at home after his accident. He lasted 9 months before his heart gave out. Doctor said it was heart failure, but I think he just got tired of asking permission to take a piss." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "Where you headed?" the driver asked. Marcus stared out at the darkness rolling past the window. "My father's ranch, outside Whitefish, near the old logging roads. Been in the family since the 40s. Your family still live there?" "No one's lived there for 5 years. Not since my dad passed." Marcus swallowed. "My daughter wanted to sell it, but I wouldn't sign the papers." So it's just been sitting empty, rotting, until tonight. Until tonight. The driver reached for his thermos, took a long drink, then offered it to Marcus. Coffee, black, and strong enough to strip paint. Marcus drank gratefully. Name's Hank, the driver said. Marcus. Well, Marcus, I can take you all the way to the ranch if you know how to find it in the dark. I could find it blind. Hank nodded. Then, let's get you home. When they drove deeper into the mountains, the highway giving way to smaller roads, then to gravel tracks that wound between towering pines. The radio played old country songs at low volume, and Duke's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, his head resting on Marcus's thigh. The weight was comforting, real, proof that they'd actually done it. As they climbed higher, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He'd turned off the ringer but kept it charged. Knowing this moment would come, he pulled it out. 7 missed calls from Riverside. 4 from Rebecca. 3 voicemails. He didn't listen to them. He knew what they'd say. They're looking for you, Hank said. Not a question. They will be by morning. Your daughter going to call the police? Marcus's throat tightened. You running from her or running toward something? The question hit deeper than expected. Marcus looked down at Duke, at the gray muzzle that hadn't been gray when they'd first met, at the scars along the dog's shoulder from the IED that had nearly killed them both. My father left me a letter, Marcus said quietly. Gave it to his lawyer. Said to deliver it, if I ever came back to the ranch. The lawyer brought it to Riverside 6 months ago. He paused. It said there was something at the ranch I needed to see. Something he'd kept hidden. Something that couldn't wait forever. He say what? No. Just that it mattered. That it was important. Marcus exhaled slowly. And that I shouldn't trust anyone except family. Hank drove in silence for a while, processing this. Sounds like your old man had a secret. Nah. My old man had a lot of secrets. Career military. Intelligence division. The kind of work that doesn't make it into official records. And you think whatever he hid is still there? I think if it wasn't, Rebecca would have found it when she cleared out his things. She's thorough. But she was looking for furniture and photo albums, not secrets. The truck's headlights caught the reflective marker Marcus had been watching for. A faded wooden sign, barely visible through overgrown brush. Webb Ranch. Private property. There, Marcus said, pointing. Hank turned onto the narrow drive. Branches scraped the truck's sides. The road hadn't been maintained in years, and potholes jarred them with every few feet. But the truck pushed through, steady and determined, until the trees opened up and the ranch revealed itself in the moonlight. The house stood exactly as Marcus remembered it, maybe a little more weathered, the porch sagging slightly on the left side, but still standing. Still home. The barn loomed behind it, a darker shadow against the night sky. Its red paint faded to rust in places. Hank stopped the truck in the circular drive. Hell of a place. Marcus's throat was too tight to speak. He'd thought about this moment every day for 5 years. Every night in the hospital. Every morning at Riverside, when he woke up to walls that weren't his. And now here it was. Real and solid and waiting. Duke lifted his head, nose working the air. His tail began to wag slowly, hesitantly, as if checking whether he was allowed to be happy. Go on, Marcus whispered. Go see. The dog bounded out when Hank opened the door, immediately circling the yard, marking territory, re-establishing old claims. His enthusiasm pulled something loose in Marcus's chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Marcus climbed down more slowly, his leg protesting every movement. Hank got out too, stretching, looking around with the appreciation of someone who understood land and solitude. You want help getting inside? Hank asked. I can manage. Hank pulled a business card from his wallet and pressed it into Marcus's hand. That's my number. You need anything. Supplies. A ride. Someone to tell the cops you're not crazy. You call me. Marcus looked at the card, then at Hank. Why? Why? Because I watched my uncle die in one of those places, and I swore I'd never let it happen to another man if I could help it. Hank climbed back into his truck. You're home now. Act like it. The truck's taillights disappeared down the drive, leaving Marcus and Duke alone in the vast Montana darkness. The silence was profound, broken only by wind, through the pines and the distant trickle of the creek that ran along the property's eastern edge. Duke trotted back to Marcus's side, pressing against his leg in that way that meant he sensed something. A shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. Marcus looked at the house, then at the barn. In his father's letter, the old man had written just one specific instruction. Check the barn first. Start with the foundation. Come on, boy, Marcus said quietly. They crossed the overgrown yard toward the barn, Marcus's cane sinking into soft earth with each step. The barn doors hung slightly askew, one hinge rusted through, but they opened with a prolonged creak that echoed across the property. Inside, the darkness was absolute. Marcus fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the interior. Dust motes swirled in the beam. Old farm equipment sat covered in tarps. Hay bales moldered in the loft. The smell was overwhelming. Earth, and rot, and time. Duke moved ahead, nose to the ground, working in the methodical pattern Marcus recognized from their deployment. The dog stopped near the back corner, where the old workbench had always stood. He pawed at the ground, whining softly. Marcus hobbled over, shining his light down. The concrete floor looked normal, dusty, and cracked with age, but when he knelt and brushed away the debris, his fingers found something. Grooves. Deliberate lines cut into the concrete, forming a rectangle about 3 feet by 4 feet. His heart rate kicked up. You found it already, didn't you, boy? Duke wagged his tail, stepping back to give Marcus room to work. Marcus ran his fingers along the grooves until he found the slight lip. He worked his cane under the edge and leveraged upward. The concrete section lifted, revealing itself as a lid, carefully camouflaged but hinged on one side. Beneath it, a steel ladder descended into darkness. Marcus's hands shook as he shined his phone down into the hole. The ladder went down at least 15 feet, ending in what looked like a concrete bunker. He could see the edge of a workbench, the corner of a filing cabinet, and something covered in a canvas tarp. Jesus Christ, Dad, Marcus whispered. What did you build? Duke whined again, not afraid, but uncertain. The dog looked at Marcus, then at the hole, seeking guidance. Marcus's leg throbbed. His head spun. Every rational part of him said to wait until morning, to rest, to approach this fresh. But the irrational part, the part that had driven him to escape Riverside, to walk through the woods, to come home, that part couldn't wait another minute. Stay here, he told Duke. Guard. Duke sat immediately, assuming the position he'd held 1,000 times at checkpoint entries, watching approaches while Marcus advanced. Marcus lowered himself onto the ladder. His legs screamed in protest as he descended rung by rung. The cane clutched awkwardly under one arm. The air grew colder as he went down, smelling of earth and concrete and something else, something chemical, like old paper and preservative. His feet hit solid ground. He turned slowly, shining his phone light around the space. It was bigger than he'd expected, roughly 20 by 20 feet, with concrete walls and a curved ceiling reinforced with steel beams. A Cold War-era bunker, maybe, or something his father had built later, using skills learned in intelligence work. The workbench held equipment Marcus recognized from his father's old office. Radio equipment, encryption devices, some dating back to the 80s. The filing cabinet stood against one wall, its drawers labeled in his father's precise handwriting. Records, correspondence, evidence, evidence. Marcus's mouth went dry. He moved to the cabinet and pulled open the top drawer. Files, dozens of them, each labeled with dates and code names. He pulled one at random. Operation Clearwater, 1984. Inside were photographs, documents with heavy redactions, and handwritten notes in his father's cramped script. Unauthorized weapons shipments to Central America, money laundering through defense contractors, names, dates, amounts, evidence of crimes his father had documented but never reported. Marcus's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the concrete floor, the file spilling across his lap. "What were you into, old man?" He pulled another file. Operation Nightfall, 1991. More of the same. Black operations, disappeared witnesses, falsified reports. His father had been collecting evidence of corruption for decades, documenting crimes committed by people in positions of power, building a case that he'd never been able to make, or maybe never dared to make. Duke barked from above, a sharp warning bark that Marcus had heard in combat zones. Someone approaching. Marcus shoved the files back into the drawer and moved to the ladder as quickly as his leg allowed. He climbed up to find Duke standing rigid at the barn entrance, hackles raised, staring toward the driveway. Headlights cut through the darkness. Two vehicles, moving slowly up the drive. Marcus's stomach dropped. Too soon for Rebecca to have found him. Too deliberate for police. These vehicles moved with purpose, like they'd known exactly where to look. He killed his phone's flashlight and moved to the barn door. Duke pressed against him, a low growl vibrating through the dog's chest. The vehicles stopped near the house. 4 men got out, all wearing dark clothes, moving with the precision of military or private security. One spoke into a radio. Another walked to the house and tried the door, then peered through windows. Marcus's blood ran cold. They weren't looking for a missing elderly veteran. They were conducting a search for what his father had hidden. He backed deeper into the barn, Duke following. His mind raced. If these men knew about the bunker, if they'd been waiting for someone to return to the ranch, if his father's secrets were dangerous enough that people were still hunting them 5 years after his death. The radio in one man's hand crackled. No sign inside. Marcus's heart hammered. They were coming. He looked at Duke. At the open hatch in the floor. At the evidence his father had spent a lifetime gathering. Evidence that people would kill to keep buried. "Down," he whispered to Duke. "Now." The dog hesitated only a second before descending the ladder with surprising grace. Marcus followed, pulling the concrete lid closed above them, just as footsteps entered the barn. In the darkness below, in his father's secret bunker, Marcus Webb realized 3 things simultaneously. First, he hadn't escaped from Riverside to find peace. Second, whatever his father had discovered was dangerous enough that powerful people still wanted it destroyed. And third, coming home might have been the most dangerous decision he'd ever made. Duke pressed against him in the darkness, warm and solid. Above them, footsteps creaked across the barn floor, searching. Marcus held his breath and waited, just like he'd learned to do in Fallujah, when staying silent meant staying alive. The footsteps above moved methodically, boots against old wooden planks, creating a rhythm that Marcus's combat-trained mind automatically mapped. 2 men, maybe 3. One heavier than the others, probably carrying equipment. They weren't rushing, weren't panicking. Professional, experienced, the kind of people who'd done this before. Duke's body was taut as wire beneath Marcus's hand, every muscle ready to launch. But the dog stayed silent. Years of training held, even in the face of imminent threat. "Nothing in here except old farm equipment," a voice called out. Male, 30s maybe. Flat accent that could have been anywhere. Hasn't been touched in years. Check everywhere. Another voice responded, older, with authority. Under tarps, behind equipment. They said the old man was paranoid. Could have hidden it anywhere. Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears. They. Footsteps moved closer to the corner where the hatch was concealed. Marcus pressed himself against the bunker wall, willing his breathing to slow, to quiet. Duke's ears flattened against his skull, a sign of extreme stress. But still, the dog made no sound. A boot scraped directly overhead. Marcus could see the faint outline of the hatch above him. Praying the dust and debris he'd disturbed wouldn't be visible in the darkness, that his disturbance would blend with years of abandonment. Floor's solid, the first voice said. Just concrete and dirt. Keep looking. Radio. If you find anything. The footsteps retreated. Voices faded as the men moved toward the loft. Marcus heard them climbing, boards creaking under their weight, a tarp being thrown back, tools clattering. He waited 5 minutes, then 10. Duke's breathing slowly normalized, the dog's head tilting toward the ladder, tracking sounds Marcus's damaged ears could barely register. Finally, the voices grew more distant. One of the vehicles started up, then the other. Red taillights swept across the barn walls, through gaps in the siding, then faded down the driveway. Marcus waited another 15 minutes, counting seconds the way his father had taught him as a kid. Patience wasn't just a virtue in intelligence work, it was survival. When he finally pushed the hatch open, the barn lay silent and empty. Dawn was beginning to break, gray light filtering through the eastern windows. The men were gone, but the evidence of their search remained. Tarps pulled aside. Equipment moved. Fresh boot prints in the dust. Duke scrambled up the ladder, immediately circling the barn, nose working overtime. He stopped at the doorway, hackles rising again. Marcus joined him, looking out at the ranch in the growing light. Everything appeared normal, but something felt off. And what was absent was any sign that the men had searched the house. They'd come straight to the barn, which meant they knew. Somehow, they knew the barn was important. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. 14 missed calls now. 8 from Rebecca, 6 from Riverside, and 3 from a number he didn't recognize with a Montana area code. He almost ignored them all, but something made him check the voicemail from the unknown number. Mr. Webb. A woman's voice. Professional. Careful. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm an attorney with Morrison and Associates in Whitefish. Your father retained our services many years ago with specific instructions to contact you if certain conditions were met. Those conditions have now been met. Please call me back immediately. This is urgent and concerns your safety. Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. His father's lawyer. Not Rebecca's lawyer, who'd delivered the letter, but another one. One Marcus hadn't known about. He looked at Duke, who was staring at the driveway, tail low, still on alert. Let's get to the house, Marcus said quietly. They crossed the yard as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. The house key was still hidden in the same place his father had always kept it, under the third river stone to the left of the porch steps. Marcus's hands shook as he unlocked the door. Inside, the house smelled of dust and time, but it was intact. Furniture covered in sheets, his mother's paintings still on the walls. His father's reading chair positioned exactly where it had always been by the fireplace. Rebecca had taken some things, family photos, his mother's jewelry, but she'd left the house essentially untouched, a museum of a life that was supposed to be over. Duke moved through the rooms, sniffing, reacquainting himself with spaces he'd known before. He paused at Marcus's father's study, whining softly. Marcus pushed open the study door. The room was exactly as he remembered it. Bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with military histories, intelligence journals, and novels in 6 languages. The desk stood clean and empty, its surface polished wood reflecting the morning light. But Duke was fixated on something behind the desk, pawing at the baseboard. "What is it, boy?" Marcus knelt, running his fingers along the wood. There, a section that didn't quite match the others. He pressed, and a small panel popped open, revealing a space about a foot square. Inside was a leather journal, a flip phone, and a key. Marcus pulled them out with shaking hands. The journal was his father's, the handwriting unmistakable. The phone was old, probably a decade out of date. But when Marcus pressed the power button, it hummed to life, fully charged. Someone had been maintaining it. The key was brass. Small, the kind that opened a safe deposit box. He opened the journal to the first page. His father's handwriting, steady and precise. "Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've found your way home. I'm sorry for the secrets. I'm sorry for the burden I'm about to place on you. But there was no one else I could trust. What I discovered over my career, the evidence I gathered, it's too dangerous to destroy and too important to ignore. The bunker holds the documentation. This key opens a safety deposit box at First Montana Bank in Whitefish, Box 237. Inside is a second copy of everything. Insurance, if something happens to the originals. But son, you need to know what you're walking into. The people I documented are still powerful. Some have retired. Some have died. But their successors, their protectors, they're still active. They've been looking for this evidence for 20 years. I disappeared it. They thought it died with me. If you activate the phone I left, it will send a signal to the one person I trusted, the one person who helped me gather this evidence and can help you decide what to do with it. Her name is Margaret Sutton. She was my handler during my last assignment. She's the reason I'm alive to write this. Trust her. Trust Duke. Trust your instincts. But trust no one else. Not Rebecca, not lawyers, not police. Not until you understand what you have. The evidence documents crimes at the highest levels, operations that never should have happened, people who died for knowing less than you'll know. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. But this is bigger than us. Always was. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I know you'll do the right thing, even when it's the hard thing. That's who you are. That's who I raised you to be. Dad. Marcus sat on the floor, the journal trembling in his hands. Duke lay down beside him, pressing his body along Marcus's side, offering comfort the only way he knew how. Outside, a vehicle approached. Duke's head shot up, a warning growl building. Marcus moved to the window, staying low. A sedan, dark blue, expensive, pulling into the driveway. One occupant, a woman, late 50s, Asian features, moving with athletic precision despite her age. She wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase. She stopped at the base of the porch steps, looking directly at the window where Marcus hid. "Marcus Webb," she called out, her voice carrying clearly. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm here on behalf of your father. We need to talk. Now. Because the men who were here earlier will be back. And next time, they won't leave without what they came for." Marcus's finger hovered over the power button of the old flip phone. "Trust her," his father had written. But his father had also written trust no one else. Duke whined, uncertain, looking to Marcus for guidance. The woman on the porch waited, patient and still, her hands visible and empty. Marcus made a decision. He opened the front door. Sarah Chen stood on his father's porch, and when their eyes met, something in her expression softened, just for a moment, grief mixed with relief. "You look like him," she said quietly. "Same eyes, same stubborn jaw." She paused. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thomas was a good man. The best I ever worked with. And then man, he's been dead 5 years, Marcus said, not moving from the doorway. Why contact me now? Because the protection I arranged expired. And because those men who came last night won't stop. She glanced at Duke. Beautiful dog. Thomas told me about him. Said you two saved each other. What do you want? To help you decide what to do with what your father left you. May I come in? Number 47's. Marcus studied her. His father's training, overlaid with his own from the Marines, assessed her posture, her breathing, the micro-expressions that most people missed. She was nervous, but not deceptive. Urgent, but not threatening. He stepped aside. Sarah Chen entered the house, moving with the awareness of someone who'd spent a career watching her surroundings. She set her briefcase on the coffee table, but didn't open it yet. Your father and I worked together for 15 years, she said. I was his analyst on 3 operations, his handler on 5 more. When he started collecting evidence of illegal activities within the intelligence community, I helped him. Verified sources, made copies, created safe hiding places. Why? Because Thomas was right. Operations were being run that violated every law, domestic and international. Money was being moved. People were dying. And the men responsible were being promoted, not prosecuted. She sat in his father's chair, a gesture that would have seemed presumptuous from anyone else but felt natural from her. Your father wanted to bring it into the light. Officially, legally, through proper channels. But every time he tried, the evidence disappeared, or the people he reported to were part of the problem. So he built a bunker full of evidence and hid it. He built insurance, a dead man's switch. If anything happened to him, the evidence would surface. She paused, except he couldn't trust it to the legal system. Too compromised. So, he trusted it to you. Marcus moved to the window, looking out at the mountains. Duke followed, pressing against his leg. He's been dead 5 years. Why didn't this dead man's switch activate? Because I delayed it. Your father asked me to watch over you, to make sure you were ready, to make sure the timing was right. Her voice softened. You weren't ready, Marcus. You were recovering from injuries, from PTSD, from losing your father. Adding this burden would have destroyed you. And I'm ready now? Marcus's laugh was bitter. I just escaped from assisted living. I can barely walk. I have nightmares that make me think I'm back in Fallujah. I'm exactly the wrong person for this. You're exactly the right person. Because you understand sacrifice. You understand what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself. Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. The men who came last night work for a private security firm called Sentinel Group. They're contractors, but they have close ties to the intelligence community. They've been hired to locate and destroy your father's evidence. She pulled up a photograph on the tablet. A man in his 60s, silver hair, expensive suit, standing at a podium. This is Richard Chambers, former Deputy Director of Operations. Retired now, but he consults for defense contractors and sits on boards. He's worth $200 million. Most of that wealth comes from operations your father documented. Another photo. A woman, 50s, blonde, smiling at a charity gala. Patricia Voss, former station chief in Eastern Europe, currently CEO of a cybersecurity firm that has contracts with 3-letter agencies. She authorized operations that killed 17 civilians in Poland. Your father has the evidence. More photos, more names, more crimes. A constellation of power and corruption that had been protected for decades. They thought the evidence died with Thomas. Sarah continued. But 6 months ago, someone started asking questions, digging into old operations. We think it was a journalist, but she disappeared before publishing anything. That triggered a new search. Chambers and the others realized the evidence might still exist. They've been watching this property, watching you, waiting to see if anyone came looking. Marcus's throat tightened. They knew I'd come here eventually. They hoped you would. Because finding the evidence and destroying it closes this chapter forever. Sarah leaned forward. But you found it first. And now you have a choice. You can give it to me, and I'll make sure it reaches people who will act on it. Or you can destroy it yourself, walk away, and let these men continue operating with impunity. Or, one plan, including no, Avring. She paused. You can do nothing, and they'll come back with enough force that neither I nor Duke will be able to stop them. Duke growled softly at the last option. Marcus closed his eyes. His leg ached. His head throbbed. Every instinct said to run, to take Duke and disappear into the mountains, to let someone else fight this battle. But his father's words echoed in his mind. You'll do the right thing, even when it's the hard thing. There's a third option, Marcus said quietly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Which is, we don't just expose them. We make sure the evidence is so public, so widely distributed, that destroying it becomes impossible. He turned to face her. How many copies exist? 2. The bunker and the safety deposit box. Then we make more. We send copies to every major news outlet, every congressional oversight committee, every foreign intelligence agency that has a stake in keeping American operations honest. Marcus's voice grew stronger. We flood the zone until there's nowhere for these men to hide. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. That's a declaration of war. They won't just try to stop you. They'll try to destroy you. Your reputation, your family, everything. My reputation is an elderly veteran who ran away from assisted living. I can live with losing the first 2. I can't live with betraying the third. Sarah's expression shifted, something like respect crossing her features. Your father said you were the most stubborn man he'd ever met. I see he was right. She stood, pulling a secure phone from her briefcase. Then, we move fast. We have maybe 48 hours before Sentinel realizes what we're doing. We'll need to access the safety deposit box, make digital copies, establish distribution networks. How do we do that from here? We don't. There's a safe house in Kalispell, set up for exactly this contingency. We move there, set up operations, and go public before they can stop us. Marcus hesitated. Running again. Hiding again. Except this time, running towards something instead of away. Duke nudged his hand, patient and trusting. Okay, Marcus said. Sarah nodded and began making calls, her voice low and efficient, activating networks that had been dormant for 5 years. Marcus returned to the bunker, loading files into a duffel bag his father had left there, probably for exactly this purpose. Evidence of crimes, proof of corruption, names, dates, operations, decades of secrets that powerful men had killed to protect. His phone buzzed again. Rebecca, he finally answered. Dad. Her voice was frantic, tears evident. Dad, where are you? They said you left Riverside. They said you might be confused, that you could be in danger. I'm not confused, Rebecca. I'm home. The ranch? Dad, you can't. You're not well enough to... I'm exactly well enough. He softened his tone. Honey, I need you to listen. Some people might contact you, asking about me, about the ranch. Don't tell them anything. Don't trust anyone who says they're trying to help me. You're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you needed after the stroke, but I'm still here. I'm still fighting, and I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing. Silence on the line. Then, quietly, I love you, too, Dad. Please, be safe. He ended the call and turned off the phone, removing the battery. If Sentinel could track him through it, He'd just made himself invisible again. Sarah appeared at the bunker entrance. "We need to go. Now." Two vehicles just turned onto the access road. "They're coming back." Marcus grabbed the duffel bag and climbed the ladder. Duke was already at the barn door. Hackles raised, a deep growl vibrating through his chest. Sarah's sedan was parked near the house, engine running. Marcus threw the duffel in the back seat and climbed in with Duke. Sarah drove, fast but controlled, taking back roads Marcus barely remembered. Behind them, through the rear window, he saw black SUVs enter the ranch property. They'd come so close. Minutes later, and he would have been trapped. Sarah drove for 20 minutes, doubling back twice, checking for tails, before finally heading toward Kalispell. The safe house turned out to be a modest cabin on the outskirts, surrounded by pines, with a view of the valley below. Inside, the cabin was more sophisticated than it appeared. Computer equipment, satellite phones, a server rack in what should have been a bedroom. This wasn't just a safe house. It was an operations center. "Your father planned this years ago," Sarah explained, booting up computers. "He knew someday it might come to this." Marcus set the duffel bag on the table. "How long do we have?" "Sentinel knows you took something from the ranch. They'll be analyzing what they can, trying to figure out our next move. If we're lucky, 36 hours before they locate us here." She pulled out a portable scanner. "Let's get to work." They spent the next 4 hours scanning documents, creating encrypted digital copies, establishing secure upload protocols. Duke lay by the door, on guard, occasionally standing to check windows. Marcus's hands cramped, his leg throbbed. But he kept working, page after page, crime after crime, evidence that would destroy careers and possibly lead to prosecutions. By evening, they had digital copies of everything. Sarah began the distribution process, sending encrypted packages to contacts she'd cultivated over decades. Journalists she trusted, congressional staffers who'd shown integrity, foreign intelligence services that had been victimized by the operations documented in the files. "Once I press send," Sarah said, finger hovering over the button. "Then let's make sure what we're sending is worth it." She pressed send. The data began flowing out across encrypted channels, spreading like a flood, irreversible and unstoppable. By morning, hundreds of people would have copies. By next week, some news organization would break the story. By next month, congressional hearings would begin. Richard Chambers and Patricia Voss and all the others documented in Thomas Webb's evidence would face the consequences they'd avoided for decades. Sarah leaned back, exhaling. Marcus looked at the empty duffel bag, at the computers still sending data, at Duke sleeping peacefully by the door. He shouldn't have had to do this. None of us should. But someone had to. And he chose you to finish it. They slept in shifts, Sarah on the couch, Marcus in a chair with Duke at his feet. When dawn broke, Sarah checked her secure channels. "It's happening," she said, showing him her tablet. Washington Post just published the first story. They're calling it the biggest intelligence scandal in 40 years. Marcus read the headline, "Decades of Illegal Operations Exposed by Deceased Analysts' Evidence." His phone, the one his father had left, buzzed. A single text message from an unknown number. "Your father was a traitor. You've made a mistake. You won't survive." Marcus showed it to Sarah. She smiled grimly. "That's how you know we won. They're threatening instead of acting. It means they've lost control of the narrative." Over the next week, the story exploded. More news organizations picked it up. Congressional committees announced investigations. The Justice Department opened a probe. Richard Chambers resigned from his board positions. Patricia Voss's company lost government contracts. And Marcus Webb, the elderly veteran who'd escaped from assisted living with only his dog, became the reluctant hero who'd finished his father's mission. Rebecca called, crying, apologizing, saying she should have listened, should have trusted him, should have let him make his own choices. Hank, the truck driver who'd given him a ride, called to say he'd known Marcus was running towards something important. Even Riverside contacted him, awkwardly, saying they understood now why he'd left, that they respected his choice. But the call that mattered most came on the 8th day. Margaret Sutton, his father's old handler, the woman his father had trusted most. Thomas would be so proud, she said. What you did, what you risked, it's exactly what he hoped you'd do. I just finished what he started. No, you did more. You made sure his sacrifice meant something. You gave him the ending he deserved. 3 months later, Marcus stood in front of a congressional committee, testifying about his father's evidence, about the operations documented, about the need for oversight and accountability. Duke sat beside him, calm and dignified, wearing his service vest. When the chairman asked Marcus what had driven him to risk everything, Marcus thought about that night in Riverside, about the decision to leave, about finding his father's bunker, about choosing to fight instead of hide. My father taught me that some fights are worth having, even when you know they'll cost you everything, Marcus said. This was one of those fights. The hearing room erupted in applause. That evening, Marcus returned to the ranch. The house had been cleaned, the barn repaired, the property maintained by volunteers who'd read about his story. He sat on the porch with Duke, watching the sun set over the mountains, drinking coffee that actually tasted like something. His phone rang. Rebecca. Hi, honey. Dad. I've been thinking. The ranch is too much for one person. What if I moved back? Helped you maintain it? The kids could grow up here, like I did. Marcus's throat tightened. Me too. And Dad, I'm sorry. For everything. For not listening. For not trusting you to make your own choices. We all do what we think is right at the time. You were trying to protect me. I know. But I should have asked what you wanted, not just decided for you. They talked for an hour, rebuilding something that had fractured. When the call ended, Marcus looked at Duke. We did it, boy. We actually did it. Duke's tail thumped against the porch. In the distance, lights appeared in the barn windows. Volunteers arriving to help restore it, to turn it into a museum documenting not just his father's evidence, but the importance of whistleblowers, of people who chose to fight corruption even at personal cost. The barn that had hidden secrets would now reveal truth. Marcus leaned back in his father's chair, Duke's head resting on his lap, and felt something he hadn't felt since before the stroke, since before the wars, since before all the years that had stolen pieces of him away. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose. The knowledge that he'd done something that mattered, that his father's sacrifice hadn't been in vain, that the evidence hidden in the barn had finally found the light. Duke sighed contentedly, and Marcus scratched behind the dog's ears. Home, he whispered. We're finally home. And this time, no one could take it away. 3:26 p.m. 6 months after the hearings, Marcus stood in the barn's main room, now transformed into something his father never could have imagined. Glass display cases held copies of the documents, redacted appropriately, but still powerful in their implications. Interactive screens allowed visitors to understand the operations, the cover-ups, the human cost of corruption. Photographs lined the walls, including one of his father, young and determined, in his military uniform. The Webb Foundation, as Rebecca had named it, had opened just 3 weeks ago. Already, thousands had visited, journalists, veterans, students, people who needed to understand that speaking truth to power wasn't just possible, it was necessary. Duke lay in his usual spot near the entrance, gray muzzle resting on his paws, watching visitors with patient dignity. Children asked to pet him. Adults thanked him for his service. He accepted both with equal grace, tail thumping softly against the polished floor. Marcus watched from his father's old office, now converted into an education center. Through the window, he could see Rebecca directing a group of high school students, explaining the timeline of events, answering questions with a passion he hadn't seen in her since she was young. She'd moved back 2 months ago with her husband and 2 kids. The house felt alive again, filled with laughter and noise, and the chaos of family. Her children had taken to Duke immediately, and the old dog seemed to shed years in their presence, playing gently, letting them dress him in scarves, sleeping at the foot of their beds. "Mr. Webb?" A young woman stood in the office doorway, late 20s, carrying a reporter's notebook. "I'm Emma Kristoff, with the Associated Press. Do you have a few minutes?" Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. Duke lifted his head, assessing the visitor, then settled again. "Good dog judgment. Lane. Good dog. I'm writing a follow-up piece on the impact of your father's evidence," Emma said. 3 congressional investigations are ongoing. The Justice Department has indicted 7 former intelligence officials. 2 defense contractors have lost billions in government contracts. Some are calling it the most significant intelligence reform in 50 years. My father did the work. I just made sure people saw it. That's not what I've heard. Emma flipped through her notes. Sarah Chen told me you made the decision to distribute the evidence widely, to make it impossible to suppress. That took courage and strategic thinking. It took desperation and stubbornness. Not quite the same thing. Emma smiled. Maybe that's what courage is, acting despite the fear. She paused. There's something else I wanted to ask you about. We've been investigating Sentinel Group, the security firm that was searching for the evidence. Marcus's attention sharpened. What kind of connections? Financial. Richard Chambers sits on Sentinel's board. Patricia Voss's company has a subsidiary that contracts with them. It looks like they weren't just hired to find the evidence. They're part of the network your father was exposing. Have you published this? Not yet. We're still verifying sources. But I wanted to warn you. Emma's expression grew serious. Sentinel hasn't gone away. They've become more subtle. But they're still operating. And some of the people connected to them aren't happy about what you've done. Marcus felt a familiar tension settle into his shoulders. You're saying I'm still in danger. Marcus, I'm saying the fight isn't over. These people have lost power, lost money, lost reputation. Some of them might want revenge. After Emma left, Marcus sat at his desk, staring at his father's photograph on the wall. The old man looked back, forever frozen at 40, still believing the system could be fixed from within. Duke ambled over, pressing his head into Marcus's lap. What do you think, boy? More trouble coming? Duke's ears twitched, always listening, always vigilant. That evening, after the foundation closed and the visitors departed, Marcus walked the property with Duke. The autumn air carried the scent of pine and coming snow. The mountains glowed amber in the sunset. They passed the spot where Sentinel's men had searched 6 months ago, where everything had begun. The ground showed no trace of that night, nature erasing evidence faster than any cover-up. His phone buzzed. Sarah Chen. Marcus, we need to talk. Can you come to Kalispell tomorrow? Or Jay? What's happened? Not over the phone. Just come. Bring Duke. The drive to Kalispell the next morning felt longer than Marcus remembered. Duke sat in the passenger seat, watching the landscape with interest. The dog loved car rides, always had. Sarah's office was in a nondescript building near the college. She met them at the door, ushering them inside quickly. Margaret Sutton contacted me last night, Sarah said without preamble. She's been monitoring chatter in the intelligence community. There's talk of a secondary cache of evidence, something your father supposedly held back as insurance against retaliation. Marcus frowned. I gave you everything from the bunker. I know. But the rumor is persistent, and Sentinel is taking it seriously. They've increased surveillance on this area. On you. On anyone connected to your father. There is no secondary cache. I believe you, but they don't. Which means they'll keep looking, keep pressuring, keep watching. Sarah pulled up security footage on her computer. This was taken 3 days ago at the ranch. The footage showed a man in hiking gear, using the public trail that ran near the property. He stopped, pulled out binoculars, and studied the barn for several minutes before continuing. Could be a hiker. Could be. Except we ran facial recognition. He works for a subsidiary of Sentinel. End quote. Fine and down and down and. Marcus's jaw tightened. They're surveilling my family. They're trying to find out if there's more evidence. And they're willing to watch and wait as long as it takes. Duke growled softly, picking up on Marcus's tension. What do I do? Marcus asked. You could go public with the fact that there is no secondary cache. Hold a press conference. State clearly that everything has been released. They won't believe me. Probably not. Or, Sarah hesitated, we could give them what they're looking for. Marcus stared at her. We create a false cache. Documents that appear to be additional evidence, but are actually carefully crafted to lead nowhere. We let them find it. Let them think they've won, and they'll stop watching. That's a dangerous game. It is. But the alternative is living under surveillance indefinitely and having your family live under that same shadow. Marcus thought of Rebecca, of her children playing in the yard, of Duke growing old in peace, of the foundation doing its work without constant threat. How would we do this? Sarah pulled out a file folder. Margaret and I have been working on it. We create documents that look authentic, that reference real operations but with false details. We hide them somewhere they'll eventually find, somewhere that requires effort, so they believe it's genuine, and we seed hints that lead them there. 4. Well said. Well seed. Where? Your father had a storage unit in Missoula. Rented under an alias, paid through an automated account. It's still active. We plant the false evidence there, leak the location through channels we know Sentinel monitors, and let them take it. Marcus looked at Duke. The dog's brown eyes met his, trusting and patient. If this goes wrong, if they figure out it's fake, they'll come after us harder. If we do nothing, they never stop watching. It took 2 weeks to prepare. Sarah and Margaret crafted the false documents with painstaking detail, mixing real information with dead ends, creating a paper trail that would take Sentinel months to unravel and lead them nowhere useful. Marcus drove to Missoula, Duke riding shotgun, and placed the documents in the storage unit his father had rented 20 years ago, under the name James Morrison. The unit was exactly as his father had left it. A few boxes of old files, some personal items, nothing that screamed secret evidence cache. Until now. Sarah began the careful process of leaking information. A conversation overheard at a coffee shop. A document accidentally left visible during a video call. Breadcrumbs that would lead Sentinel to believe there was more evidence. That Marcus had been holding back. That the storage unit in Missoula contained what they'd been searching for. 3 weeks later, surveillance footage from the storage facility showed 2 men entering the unit. They spent an hour inside, carefully photographing everything, taking the false documents. They bought it, Sarah confirmed. Margaret's sources say Sentinel is standing down surveillance on the ranch. They think they've secured what they needed. Marcus exhaled slowly. Months, maybe longer. By then, the congressional investigations will be complete. The indictments will stand. The story will be old news. They'll have no reason to come after you. And if I'm wrong, then we deal with it. Together. Winter came to Montana with its usual intensity. Snow buried the ranch under 3 feet of white, transforming the landscape into something pristine and silent. The foundation closed for the season, reopening in spring. Marcus spent the quiet months with family, teaching Rebecca's kids to chop wood, to read animal tracks in the snow. Duke played in the snow like a puppy, despite his age, bounding through drifts with Rebecca's daughter riding on his back, both of them laughing. One evening, as Marcus sat by the fireplace with Duke at his feet, "I wanted to update you," she said. Sentinel analyzed the documents from Missoula. Took them 4 months, but they finally realized they were chasing ghosts. Marcus's stomach tightened. And they've closed their investigation. Officially declared that all of Thomas Webb's evidence has been accounted for, and that continued pursuit is not cost-effective. She paused. "You're free, Marcus. They're done." Just like that, the congressional reforms passed last month. New oversight measures, new accountability structures. The people your father documented have lost their power bases. Sentinel's clients don't want to draw more attention by continuing to harass you. It's over. After the call ended, Marcus sat in silence, letting the weight of those words settle. Over. The fight his father started, the mission Marcus had continued, the danger that had followed them for months, all of it was finally over. Duke lifted his head, sensing the shift in mood. "We won, boy," Marcus whispered. "We actually won." Spring returned with explosive color. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. The foundation reopened with expanded exhibits. A documentary crew arrived to film a piece about Thomas Webb's legacy. Marcus gave interviews, told his story, answered questions about courage and sacrifice, and doing the right thing, even when it cost everything. He became, reluctantly, a symbol of resistance to corruption, of ordinary people standing against powerful institutions. But mostly, he was just a man living on his father's ranch with his dog and his family, grateful for every ordinary moment. One morning, he woke to find Duke hadn't gotten up from his bed. The old dog lifted his head when Marcus approached, tail thumping weakly, but his legs wouldn't support him. The vet confirmed what Marcus already knew. Duke was 14, ancient for a working dog. His heart was failing. They could try treatments, buy a few more weeks or months, but the quality of life would deteriorate. Or, the vet said gently, "We can let him go peacefully, while he's still himself." Marcus sat in the exam room with Duke's head in his lap, Rebecca beside him holding his hand, and made the hardest decision of his life. "You were the best partner I could have asked for," he whispered to Duke. "You saved my life more times than I can count. You helped me finish what Dad started. You did everything right, boy. Everything." Duke's brown eyes met his, still bright, still trusting. "It's okay to rest now. You've earned it." Rebecca was crying. Marcus was too, tears falling into Duke's fur. The vet administered the injection with practiced gentleness. Duke sighed once, pressed his head more firmly into Marcus's lap, and went still. They buried him on the ranch, on the hill overlooking the valley, with a view of the mountains he'd loved. The headstone read, "Duke, faithful guardian, loyal friend, hero." The foundation established the Duke Memorial Fund, providing service dogs to veterans free of charge. Rebecca ran the program, matching dogs with people who needed them, continuing the legacy of partnership and healing. Marcus struggled in the months after Duke's death. The house felt emptier. His walks around the property were solitary. The nightmares came back, sometimes, without Duke's steady presence to ground him. But slowly, he found a new rhythm, working at the foundation, mentoring young veterans who visited, sharing his father's story and Duke's story and his own story of how they'd all saved each other in different ways. A year after Duke's death, on the anniversary of the day Marcus had escaped from Riverside, he stood at the grave on the hill. Wildflowers grew thick around the headstone. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and new grass. "I miss you, boy," he said quietly. "Every damn day." A young German shepherd appeared beside him, leash trailing. Rebecca's kids had named her Scout, and she'd become the Foundation's official mascot, greeting visitors, providing comfort to veterans who needed it. Scout sat beside Marcus, looking out at the valley with bright, intelligent eyes. "You're not him," Marcus said, "but you've got his spirit." Scout leaned against his leg, warm and solid. Marcus thought about everything that had brought him to this moment. His father's secrets, the escape from Riverside, the fight to expose corruption, Duke's loyalty, the price paid, and the victory won. All of it leading here, to this hill, to this view, to this moment of peace. He pulled out his phone and called Rebecca. "Hey, Dad," she answered, sounding happy. "I was thinking, the Foundation is doing well. The documentary brought in more donations than we expected. What would you think about expanding, creating a full Veterans Retreat Center here on the ranch?" Silence for a moment. Then, "Dad, that's a wonderful idea. What made you think of it?" Marcus looked at Duke's grave, at Scout sitting patiently beside him, at the valley spreading below. "Because Dad built something meant to expose darkness. Duke helped me finish that work. But now, I want to build something that creates light. A place where veterans can heal, can find purpose, can remember they're more than their wounds." "When do we start?" "Tomorrow." Over the next 2 years, they transformed the ranch, built cabins for visiting veterans, established therapy programs, brought in counselors, service dog trainers, occupational therapists, created gardens where people could work with their hands and watch things grow. The Webb Ranch Veterans Retreat became a model program, featured in national media, visited by congressional delegations, funded by grants and donations from people who believed in its mission. Marcus led morning hikes, taught woodworking classes, sat on the porch with veterans who needed someone to listen, who understood. He shared his father's story, Duke's story, his own struggles with PTSD and recovery and finding purpose after loss. And slowly, person by person, life by life, the ranch became a place of healing. On the 5th anniversary of his escape from Riverside, the ranch held a celebration. Hundreds attended, veterans who'd found help there, donors who supported the mission, journalists who'd covered the story, even some of the congressional representatives who'd investigated the corruption Marcus's father had exposed. Sarah Chen came. Margaret Sutton came. Hank, the truck driver who'd given Marcus that first ride, came. Emma Kristoff, the journalist, came. Rebecca stood beside Marcus on the newly built pavilion, looking out at the crowd. "You did it, Dad. You took everything you and Grandpa fought for and turned it into something that helps people every day." Marcus shook his head. "Duke and I did it. And Dad did it. And you did it. And every person who chose to believe that one person speaking truth could actually make a difference." That evening, after the crowd dispersed and the ranch fell quiet, Marcus walked to the hill where Duke was buried. Scout followed, along with 3 other dogs from the Foundation's service dog program. The sun set behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Marcus sat beside Duke's grave, the dogs settling around him. "We changed things, boy," he said quietly. "Maybe not the whole world, but our corner of it. People are being held accountable. Veterans are getting help. And the secrets Dad kept for so long are finally serving the purpose he intended." A cool breeze moved through the pines, carrying the sound of laughter from the ranch below. Rebecca's kids playing. Veterans sharing stories around a campfire. Life continuing, growing, healing. Marcus thought about that night 5 years ago when he'd walked out of Riverside with nothing but Duke and desperation. He'd thought he was running toward answers, toward his father's secrets, toward some understanding of why everything had fallen apart. But what he'd actually found was purpose. Not in the evidence itself, but in the choice to act despite fear, to fight despite the cost, to believe that truth mattered even when it was dangerous. Duke had been beside him for every step of that journey until he couldn't walk anymore. And now, other dogs carried on his legacy, helping other veterans find their way home. "Thank you," Marcus whispered. "For everything." Scout pressed against him, warm and solid, a reminder that even in loss, life continued, that healing was possible, that the fight his father started and Marcus finished had created something lasting and good. Below, in the barn that had once hidden secrets, lights glowed. The foundation would open again tomorrow, welcoming a new group of veterans who needed what this place offered: community, understanding, hope. Marcus stood slowly, his leg cooperating better these days with the physical therapy the ranch's staff had insisted he do. He walked down the hill with the dogs following, toward the lights and voices and life he'd built from the ashes of his father's mission and Duke's loyalty. As he reached the pavilion, a young veteran approached him, a woman in her 30s with a service dog at her side. "Mr. Webb, I just wanted to thank you. This place, what you've created here, it saved my life. I was where you were 5 years ago, lost, broken, ready to give up. But coming here, working with my dog, hearing your story, it showed me there's a path forward." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "What's your dog's name?" "Hope." "It is." Marcus looked at Hope, a young lab mix with bright, intelligent eyes. "Take care of each other. That's the most important thing." "We will. Thank you. For everything." As she walked away, Rebecca appeared beside him. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah," Marcus said, meaning it. "Yeah, I really am." They stood together, watching veterans and families and dogs moving through the space they'd created, each person carrying their own story of struggle and survival, all of them finding something here they'd thought they'd lost. This was what his father had wanted, Marcus realized. Not just exposure of corruption, not just justice for crimes committed, but a world where the sacrifice meant something, where the truth created change, where people could heal from the wounds that war and betrayal and loss had inflicted. Duke had helped him understand that, had shown him through years of loyal service that healing came through connection, through purpose, through the simple act of showing up for each other every single day. The dogs at the ranch did that now. The staff did that. The veterans who visited and then returned to help others did that. A chain of healing, stretching forward, built on the foundation his father laid, and Duke protected, and Marcus finally brought into the light. As night settled over the Montana mountains and stars began to appear, Marcus Webb stood on his father's land. It is under 5, surrounded by people he'd helped and who'd helped him, and felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever in Riverside's fluorescent hallways. Belonging, not to a place, though the ranch was home, not to a mission, though the foundation had purpose, but to something larger, a community of people who understood that surviving wasn't enough, that healing required courage and connection, and the willingness to build something better from the broken pieces. His father had given him the tools. Duke had given him the strength. And together, they'd given him the chance to become someone his younger self would have been proud of. A man who kept promises. A man who finished what needed finishing. A man who understood that the hardest battles were the ones fought not with weapons, but with truth and persistence, and the stubborn refusal to let evil win by silence. Scout barked once, calling him back to the present. Marcus smiled and walked toward his family, toward the life he'd built from secrets and sacrifice, toward a future that honored the past while creating something new. The barn stood illuminated against the night, no longer hiding anything, instead revealing everything worth knowing about courage and loyalty and the unbreakable bonds between those who fight together. And somewhere in the mountains, in the wind through the pines, Marcus could almost hear Duke's bark of approval, telling him what the old dog had always known. They'd made it home. Together.